Bruce Lee is not only the ultimate martial arts star, he's also one of the most beloved Asian actors and fight choreographers in cinematic history. A pioneering filmmaker and an incredible fighter, Lee had an awe-inspiring career that was tragically cut short by his untimely death in 1973. Nevertheless, Lee's impact continues to be seen in Hollywood today, with his image-inspiring film appearances and numerous documentaries and biopics every year. He's an icon with an almost mythological legacy that continues to be influential today. To trace the origins of the man, the myth, and the legend that is Bruce Lee, let's take a look at the top 10 most essential moments from his short-lived film career. Number 10. Fight with Hakim. Game of Death. 1978's Game of Death is a weird movie. It's the result of a low-budget cobbling together of a 1970 film that Lee left unfinished when he died, and a wraparound story featuring not-so-convincing stand-ins for the deceased star. The scenes that Lee did film are fantastic, and some of the most iconic in his career. Here he dons the famous yellow tracksuit that would later inspire the wardrobe in Quentin Tarantino's Kill Bill. While the entire pagoda fight is great, the highlight of the movie is Lee's duel with Hakim, a hulking giant of a martial arts star played to perfection by the great Kareem Abdul-Jabbar. It's a classic showdown, with the 5'8" star proving to his 7'2" opponent that the bigger they are, the harder they fall. Number 9. Duel with O'Hara. Enter the Dragon. Enter the Dragon is often hailed as one of Lee's greatest films, and for good reason, with its blend of martial arts and spy film tropes, with a pinch or two of blaxploitation zaniness thrown in. It's one of the ultimate must-watch films of the 1970s. Lee is, of course, awesome in it. While there are many great fight scenes in Enter the Dragon, one of the best is when Lee finally gets a shot at revenge against the ruthless bodyguard O'Hara, the man responsible for the death of Lee's sister. It's a thrilling duel with stunning fight choreography, made even more vicious due to the personal vendetta at the center of it. Number 8. The Ice Factory Battle. The Big Boss. The Big Boss marks Lee's first major film role, and is the movie that launched him to international superstardom. One of the best scenes in the movie is when Lee is ambushed by baddies at an ice factory. This fight sets the precedent for all of Lee's later films. Though he's unarmed and outnumbered, he's not giving up without a fight. What follows is a dazzling and unflinchingly brutal beatdown featuring punches, kicks, a volley of throwing knives, and some incredible ice pick miscues. It tops off the violence with a wink of humor as Lee punches one of the thugs straight through a wall, leaving a perfectly shaped hole in the wall that looks like it came right out of a Looney Tunes cartoon. Number 7. We'll show him Chinese boxing. The Way of the Dragon. With The Way of the Dragon, Lee made his directorial debut and showed the world he's not only got the fighting chops, but a flair for energetic filmmaking as well. Being his only finished directed film, The Way of the Dragon has a unique tone and style that none of his other films quite match. It seamlessly weaves humor into the intense action, a trait best exemplified in the fight scene, where Lee decides to show a band of thugs his own special brand of Chinese boxing. With plenty of quips and sly glances, Lee makes quick work of the smug gangsters, demonstrating a confident swagger that he'd later perfect in Enter the Dragon. Number 6. Duel with the Big Boss. The Big Boss. After a long and exciting build-up, Lee finally takes on the titular boss at the end of The Big Boss, and it's one of the most satisfying moments in his filmography. The epic duel concludes with Lee deflecting a throwing knife with a perfectly timed kick, then finishing off his foe with an uncharacteristically animalistic move, jamming his fingers into the boss's ribs and squeezing the life out of him. It doesn't get more savage than that. Number 5. Fight in the Hall of Mirrors. Enter the Dragon. As we near the top of the pile of the most essential Bruce Lee moments, we have to revisit the seminal Enter the Dragon. Specifically, the famous fight in the Hall of Mirrors. Lee's final confrontation with the evil crime lord Han takes a surreal turn when their fight moves into a room full of mirrors. The mirrors initially give Han the edge in the fight, but Lee takes over by smashing all of the mirrors in this super stylish and iconic sequence. Number 4. Bruce takes on the entire DOJO. Fist of Fury. You must be tired of living says the man at the door of the Japanese dojo that Lee kicks down at the start of this iconic sequence. Here, Lee takes out an entire dojo of fighters after they insult his recently departed master. From one of the best martial arts films of the 1970s, Fist of Fury is loaded with spectacular action set pieces. But this dojo fight is up there with Lee's all-time best moments. Number 3. Showdown with Chuck Norris, The Way of the Dragon. Lee's directorial debut ends with an explosive duel between him and fellow martial arts legend Chuck Norris, taking an incredible moment to even greater heights. The fight takes place in the Roman Colosseum and is set to the tune of music borrowed from the spaghetti western masterpiece Once Upon a Time in the West. The wordless 8-minute fight scene is refereed by a stray cat and exemplifies Lee's excellent visual storytelling abilities. Joe Barry of Empire Online is right on the money in calling it just about the best combat sequence ever shot. Number 2. The Final Flying Kick, Fist of Fury. Fist of Fury, arguably Lee's greatest film, ends with one of the most shocking and exciting moments in his career. Just after surrendering himself to protect his master's legacy, Lee is betrayed and comes face to face with an army of Japanese soldiers ready to do him in. In a final act of defiance, Lee roars like a dragon and launches a flying kick into the crowd of soldiers. The film freeze frames as the sound of a barrage of rifles firing kicks in, and Lee's character's final sacrifice for honor is immortalized by the iconic image of his fearless snarl and mimic. It's an epic conclusion to a great film, and a moment that epitomizes Lee's bold and valorous legacy as a fighter, an actor, a filmmaker, and a man. Number 1. Lee vs. the Russian Steelbender. Though it's not USUAL, sometimes on their way to the main villain, the heroes find sidekicks who are stronger than their boss. This is what happened in Fist of Fury. Lee is confronted by a Russian powerhouse who is capable of bending steel rods and can even thrust nails into hard objects with his bare hands. Initially, the monster appears to be putting up a good fight, but it isn't long before it's Lee's turn. Lee begins raining kicks and punches and manhandles the monster in a humiliating way. Then, with a super kick followed by a killer chop to the Adam's apple, Lee finishes the strongman. Probably, the monster would have been better off if he chose to entertain people with his bending skills in a circus or something. Well, that's it for today. Make sure to subscribe our channel and do like this video and press the bell notification icon so that you don't miss any of our videos.